In 1902, Marshal Leo Bennett sat in his office in Muskogee, Oklahoma, holding a murder warrant. He didn't want to give it to anyone. The warrant was for Benjamin Reeves, Benny to his friends, who had shot his wife in a jealous rage. The problem wasn't that Benny had fled. The problem was who his father was. Bass Reeves, the most feared deputy marshal in Indian Territory, a man who had arrested over 3,000 criminals in 32 years, a man who had killed 14 outlaws in shootouts and never once been wounded. No deputy wanted to be the one to arrest Bass Reeves's son. Bennett tried to assign it to someone else, anyone else. But when Bass walked into the office and saw the warrant sitting on the desk, he understood immediately. "Give me the writ," Bass said. Bennett hesitated. "Bass, you don't have to. Give me the writ." Bass took the warrant, walked out of the office, and disappeared into the Oklahoma hills. 2 weeks later, he returned with his son in handcuffs. This is the story of Bass Reeves, born enslaved in 1838, escaped during the Civil War, became one of the first black deputy marshals west of the Mississippi River, and over 3 decades proved that the law was stronger than blood, stronger than prejudice, and stronger than anything the frontier could throw at him. Bass Reeves was born in Crawford County, Arkansas, in July 1838. He was enslaved by William Steele Reeves, an Arkansas state legislator. When Bass was about 8 years old, the Reeves family moved to Texas, settling in Grayson County. Bass grew up strong, 6 feet 2 inches tall, powerful build, good with horses, excellent shot with a rifle. These skills caught the attention of George Reeves, William's son, who took Bass as his personal servant when he joined the Confederate Army during the Civil War. The exact details of what happened next are unclear. What we know is this: at some point during the war, probably around 1862, Bass Reeves beat George Reeves severely, possibly during an argument over a card game. Then Bass ran. He fled north into Indian Territory, the vast lawless region that would later become Oklahoma. He lived among the Cherokee, Creek, and Seminole tribes for years. Bass learned their languages. He learned how to track, how to read the land, how to disappear when necessary. He became fluent in Cherokee, Creek, Seminole, Choctaw, and Chickasaw, 5 languages that would later make him invaluable as a lawman. When the Emancipation Proclamation was issued in 1863, Bass was no longer a fugitive slave. He was free. In 1864, Bass married Nellie Jenny, a woman from Texas. He bought land near Van Buren, Arkansas, and became a farmer and rancher. Over the next decades, they had 10 children together: Newland, Benjamin, George, Lula, Robert, Sally, Edgar, Bass Jr., Harriet, and Homer. Bass was a prosperous farmer. Occasionally, he worked as a scout for deputy marshals traveling into Indian Territory, using his knowledge of the land and languages to help lawmen navigate the dangerous region. But in 1875, everything changed. In May 1875, President Ulysses S. Grant appointed Isaac C. Parker as federal judge for the Western District of Arkansas, based in Fort Smith. Parker's jurisdiction included Indian Territory, 75,000 square miles of the most lawless land in America. Indian Territory had become a haven for every killer, horse thief, bootlegger, and outlaw in the region. Federal law barely reached there. The saying went, "There is no law west of St. Louis, and no God west of Fort Smith." Parker, who would later be called the hanging judge, was told to clean it up. He appointed U.S. Marshal James F. Fagan and ordered him to hire 200 deputy marshals. Fagan had heard of Bass Reeves, a black man who knew Indian Territory better than anyone, who spoke 5 tribal languages, who could track like no one else. In 1875, Bass Reeves was hired as a deputy U.S. Marshal. He was 37 years old, and for the next 32 years, he would become a legend. Bass Reeves was an imposing figure, 6'2", riding a large white stallion, always wearing a wide-brimmed black hat, his boots polished to a shine, 2 Colt .45 revolvers strapped to his belt, butts forward for a fast draw. He was ambidextrous, he rarely missed. But Bass's real weapons weren't his guns, they were his mind and his disguises. Because Bass Reeves couldn't read or write. When he was enslaved, he'd wanted to learn to read the Bible. His owner told him slaves weren't allowed to learn, so Bass never learned. But when warrants were handed out at the Fort Smith courthouse, Bass would have someone read them aloud to him. He would memorize every detail, every name, every crime, every description. Sometimes he'd be handed a pocket full of warrants, 10, 15, 20 at a time, and he'd memorize them all. Then, he'd ride out into Indian Territory. A typical expedition included Bass, a cook with a wagon, and at least one posseman, often a Native American. He wouldn't return for weeks or even months. When he came back to Fort Smith, he'd be herding multiple prisoners, reciting from memory which warrant applied to which prisoner, never making a mistake. And the way he captured them? That's where the stories become legendary. Bass was a master of disguise. On one occasion, Bass tracked two outlaw brothers to their mother's home near the Red River, about 28 miles from his camp. The reward for these two men was $5,000, a fortune in the 1880s. Bass disguised himself as a homeless drifter. He wore ragged clothes, worn-out shoes, and carried a rickety cane. His hat had 3 bullet holes in it, which he'd shot there himself. Under his clothes, he concealed his badge, handcuffs, and pistol. He walked 28 miles on foot. When he arrived at the house, he knocked on the door. An elderly woman answered. Bass told her a tale. His feet were aching because he'd been chased by a posse who'd put 3 holes in his hat. Could he have something to eat? The woman believed him. She invited him in. While he ate, she told him about her 2 sons who were on the run from the law. She suggested the 3 of them should team up. Bass agreed enthusiastically. That evening, the 2 brothers arrived home. They welcomed Bass as a fellow outlaw. They talked about their crimes. They made plans for future robberies. The mother prepared beds, suggesting all 3 men sleep in the same room. And when the brothers fell asleep that night, Bass handcuffed them both to the bed. In the morning, he woke them with a boot to the ribs. Then, Bass marched them 28 miles back to his camp, with their furious mother following behind, screaming curses the entire way. Bass used variations of this trick dozens of times. He would pose as a cowboy, a farmer, an outlaw, a preacher. Sometimes he'd pretend to be a beggar with a letter, asking outlaws to read it for him. When they dropped their eyes to the page, he'd pull his gun. On another occasion, Bass disguised himself as a farmer whose wagon had broken down near an outlaw hideout. He called out for help. When the criminals came out to lift the wagon, he drew his pistols and arrested them all. He once arrested 17 men at the same time, using nothing but clever deception and a fast draw. But Bass didn't always use tricks. In 1884, a notorious outlaw named Jim Webb had killed multiple men. When Bass finally tracked him down, Webb tried to outdraw him. Bass was faster. Webb died in the dirt. In the late 1880s, Bass went after the Tom Story gang, horse thieves who had evaded capture for years. Bass studied their patterns, learned their routes, then waited. When Tom Story appeared, Bass presented the arrest warrant. Story panicked and drew his gun. Bass shot him dead. The rest of the gang disbanded immediately. In 1890, Bass arrested a Seminole outlaw named Greenleaf, who had murdered 7 people and had been on the run for 18 years. Bass tracked him relentlessly until Greenleaf had nowhere left to hide. Over his career, Bass killed 14 men in the line of duty. That's what his obituary reported, though some accounts suggest the number may have been higher. Every single one was in self-defense during an arrest. He always said, "I never shot a man when it was not necessary for him to do so in the discharge of his duty to save his own life." And despite being shot at dozens of times, once having his hat shot off his head, another time having his belt shot off, Bass Reeves was by most accounts never seriously wounded in 32 years. The Oklahoma City Weekly Times Journal reported, "Reeves was never known to show the slightest excitement under any circumstance. He does not know what fear is." His reputation grew. Outlaws feared him. Some would surrender immediately when they learned Bass Reeves was coming. Others would flee Indian Territory entirely rather than face him. When Bass wasn't in disguise, he was often recognized by the silver dollars he gave out as calling cards. He'd pay families who helped him with information or give silver dollars to children. It was a gesture that gained him goodwill and ensured people remembered the name Bass Reeves. His fees and rewards from arrests sometimes amounted to thousands of dollars for a single trip. Newspapers reported his exploits. The Muskogee Phoenix called him one of the bravest men the country has ever known. But in 1902, Bass faced the hardest test of his life. Benjamin "Benny" Reeves was Bass's son. He worked as a barber in Muskogee. He'd married a Creek woman named Costella Brown on November 20th, 1900. The marriage was troubled. Benny worked long hours, sometimes holding multiple jobs. His absences left Costella lonely. She took lovers. When Benny first discovered his wife with another man, he forgave them. Over whiskey one night, he asked his father what Bass would have done in the same situation. Bass didn't hesitate. "I'd have shot the man and whipped the living God out of her." On June 7th, 1902, Benny went to the house where Costella was staying. He confronted her about another affair. She confessed, then told him she wasn't in love with him, that she thought more of her lover's little finger than of Benny's whole body. Benny lost control. At 11 in the morning, he shot Costella Brown in the head, killing her. Then, he turned the Colt .45 revolver on himself and pulled the trigger, attempting suicide. But the bullet only grazed his forehead. Bleeding and panicked, Benny fled. A warrant was issued for murder. Marshal Leo Bennett knew what this meant. Out of respect for Bass, he tried to assign the warrant to another deputy. He let it sit on his desk for 2 days. No one volunteered. When Bass walked into the office and saw the warrant, he knew immediately what it was. "Give me the writ," Bass said. Bennett protested. Bass was 64 years old. This was his son, but Bass was adamant. "It's my job to bring my son to justice." Reluctantly, Bennett gave Bass the warrant. The accounts differ on what happened next. Some say Bass tracked Benny for 2 weeks through the Oklahoma hills. Others say Benny surrendered immediately to his father in Muskogee. But all accounts agree on one fact. Bass Reeves arrested his own son for murder. When Benny filled out the prisoner agreement form, he wrote, "Where and by whom were you arrested?" "Muskogee by Bass Reeves, my father, who was deputy marshal." The trial was held in January 1903. Bass stood by his son throughout. He visited him in jail. He attended every day of the trial. On January 22, 1903, Benny was convicted by a jury in Muskogee. The presiding judge was C.W. Raymond. Benny was sentenced to life in prison at Leavenworth Federal Prison in Kansas. The Muskogee Daily Phoenix wrote about Bass. His devotion to duty equaling that of the old Roman, Brutus, whose greatest claim on fame has been that the love for his son could not sway him from justice. The arrest took a severe toll on Bass, both emotionally and physically. But he continued working. After serving 11 years behind bars and being deemed a model prisoner, Benny's sentence was commuted. He returned to Muskogee, remarried, opened a barbershop, and lived the rest of his life as a model citizen. He never committed another crime. But Bass didn't live to see his son's release. In 1907, when Oklahoma became a state, federal jurisdiction over Indian Territory ended. Bass Reeves retired from the U.S. Marshal Service at age 68, having served longer than any other deputy marshal in Indian Territory's history. He wasn't done yet. He joined the Muskogee Police Department as a patrol officer and worked for 2 more years. On January 12, 1910, Bass Reeves died of Bright's disease, a kidney condition, at age 71. He died in Muskogee, surrounded by family. His obituary ran in newspapers across the country. One said he was absolutely fearless and knowing no master but duty. Hundreds attended his funeral. Over 32 years as a deputy U.S. Marshal, Bass Reeves made over 3,000 arrests. though historian Art Burton notes that exact numbers are difficult to verify because newspaper accounts often omitted Bass's name due to racial tensions. Still, by any measure, he was one of the most effective lawmen of his era. He arrested Belle Starr, one of the most notorious outlaws in the West. He brought in entire gangs single-handedly. He survived countless shootouts. More than 120 deputy marshals lost their lives in Indian Territory during those years. Bass Reeves survived them all, and many historians believe he was the inspiration for the Lone Ranger. The similarities are striking. Both worked with Native American companions. Both were expert marksmen. Both used disguises regularly. Both worked primarily alone, bringing criminals to justice across vast territories. The Lone Ranger gave out silver bullets as calling cards. Bass Reeves gave out silver dollars. Both rode white horses, at least for a period of Bass's career. Even their last names are similar. The Lone Ranger was originally John Reed, a Texas Ranger. And here's a curious detail. Many criminals Bass arrested were sent to the Detroit House of Corrections, the same city where the Lone Ranger character was first introduced via radio in 1933. Historian Art Burton, author of the definitive biography Black Gun, Silver Star, concludes, Reeves is the closest real person to resemble the fictional Lone Ranger on the American Western frontier of the 19th century. But unlike the Lone Ranger, Bass Reeves was real. Today, Reeves is finally getting the recognition he deserves. The US 62 bridge between Muskogee and Fort Gibson, Oklahoma, was renamed the Bass Reeves Memorial Bridge in 2011. A bronze statue was erected in Fort Smith, Arkansas in 2012. In 1992, he became the first black man inducted into the Hall of Great Westerners at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. Books have been written. A television series premiered in 2023, finally bringing his story to mainstream audiences. But for decades after his death, Bass Reeves lay in an unmarked grave, its location unknown. Bass Reeves proved something the frontier needed to see. That justice wasn't about the color of your skin. It was about courage, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to duty. In an era when most black men in America had no rights, no voice, and no power, Bass Reeves wore a badge and commanded respect from outlaws and lawmen alike. He walked into outlaw camps alone and walked out with prisoners. He tracked fugitives across 75,000 square miles of wilderness. He survived shootouts that would have killed anyone else. And when duty called him to arrest his own son for murder, when every other deputy refused to do it, Bass Reeves took the warrant and did his job. Bass Reeves wasn't just one of the greatest lawmen in the American West. He was one of the greatest lawmen in American history.